Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're continuing our discussion of Oath of the Gatewatch, looking this time at the colorless cards as well as the artifacts. And just a disclaimer here, by colorless, I'm referring to cards that have no colored costs, basically. So I'm not including devoid cards, because then every card would be in the same set, or the same video. So cards that only cost colorless or generic mana, as well as artifacts. So let's not waste any time. Again, thank you all for watching, and here we go, looking at the first card, Warden of Geometries. By the way, that's what I called my geometry teacher in 9th grade. But here we have a 4-mana 2/3, so not really passing the vanilla test here. The stats are a little weak for what we've got. Even with the vigilance, that's not fantastic. Not something I'd be happy to play, so we're really banking on the ability to add colorless here to make Warden of Geometries worth it. Now, this does ramp us in a normal deck. We can still use that colorless to just get ahead on mana, so this does ramp us from 4 to 6. I'm not entirely sure that's fantastic, but it is still something that's worth noting. Also, Vigilance is a good ability to put on a mana creature because it allows you to attack with that creature while also tapping with it for its ability. In general, Vigilance is just good with tap abilities, but this doesn't do anything particularly well, but it does do enough that I think it's a playable card, especially if you need that colorless mana. This might just be the role filler that you need in your deck. At 4 mana, this is kind of clunky, and I can see not wanting multiples of it or cutting it if I have better cards that do the same thing, either for less or more efficiently. But Warden of Geometry seems like a fine playable card in this format, just my opinion. We have something very similar following that. Hedron Crawler is 2 mana for an 0/1 artifact creature that taps for colorless mana, and that's it. Now, the immediate comparison that I can think of is cards like Leaf Gilder and Golden Hide. Obviously, these 2 mana green ramp cards, which for green are top picks, top common picks that go very quickly out of the pack. Now, we have to be careful, especially if you go back and look at my Battle for Zendikar preview, of just comparing cards to similar cards and assuming that they're going to be the same. Case in point being something like Sludge Crawler, which turned out to be much, much, much better than it looked. Now, Hedron Crawler, in my opinion, isn't great. The fact that it's an 0/1 means that it's not ever going to do anything except for tap for mana, whereas Golden Hide and Leaf Gilder can sometimes attack or trade for a creature. Hedron Crawler can't do that. Now, Hedron Crawler does ramp us from 2 to 4, which is what we need it for. Also, maybe you just didn't pick up a Waste Steer in the draft, but you have one of these guys, you can pick it up. The good thing about Hedron Crawler is that it doesn't seem very likely that it's going to attract removal from your opponent. If I were facing the other side and my opponent played a Hedron Crawler, I would not want to waste any premium removal to get it off the board. It's neither scary nor is it very demanding for an answer, so I think it's fine, and it remains to be seen whether ramping in a colorless deck is going to be similar to ramping in a green deck. My opinion here is that doing so is fine, even though I don't think Hedron Crawler is going to be a very high pick. I think that's going to be fine because, as we'll see, these colorless decks have a lot of fatties that we want to ramp into. The sooner we get them down, the sooner we can start bashing our opponent. So if we have these colorless creatures that need the mana, then I would probably play Hedron Crawler, but I'm not sure whether I would play it outside of a colorless deck right now, just to ramp ahead, because the card itself is not ever going to do anything noticeable except for ramp you. Another card in the similar vein is Seer's Lantern. This is a 3-mana mana rock. We see this effect at 3 quite often. It taps for colorless mana and has an additional ability to tap and pay 2 mana, scry 1. This is very similar. I feel like this is going to be a card that goes very late in the pack. You don't want it in every deck just because at 3 it is kind of clunky. It gets you from 3 to 5, and there are a lot of 5 drops worth playing a turn early, and that might just be what pushes you ahead in a match, is getting out your big fatty a turn earlier than your opponent can. The scry here is a little expensive, but it does make the artifact have some sort of lasting appeal if you no longer really need the mana. This is a nice option to have, but I can see not playing this if I don't need the Colorless, just because at 3 it's clunky to play something that just makes more mana. You want to be affecting the board by that turn, especially when there are such good multicolor cards coming down on turn 3 that are going to shape the game, as we'll see when I talk about the multicolor cards. So I don't think you need to prioritize Seer's Lantern if you want this sort of effect. I think you're going to get it late in the draft, but this remains to be seen how useful this card is. Let me know what you think about this one. I don't have a very strong opinion about it. Kozilek's Pathfinder, 6 mana for a 5/5. Colorless activation cost. Kozilek's Pathfinder can't be blocked by target creature this turn. Now that's pretty neat. If you have a slew of colorless mana in your deck, perhaps you went crazy and drafted all of the wastes, then Pathfinder for a decent cost, 1 mana per creature, is bashing in for 5 every turn. That does clock your opponent, and this is the type of card that maybe you want to ramp into. So if you have that Wardens of Geometry on turn 4, you can play the Pathfinder on turn 5. Also, the Hedron Crawler that we saw gets you to Warden on turn 3, which can potentially get you to a 6-drop on turn 4. So it is possible that these ramp cards are definitely worth it. We have ramp options in Colorless at 2, 3, and 4, which means that a 6-drop here should be able to come out much earlier than 6 if we need it to. Also, the sources will work towards activating this guy's effect, and this puts a clock on your opponent in limited. I think you may want one of these in your color stacks, but I don't think you want too many of them. It is still a 6 mana card, and you have to be careful how many of those you jam in your deck. We get Bonesaw. Let's I think this card needs some discussion. This is a reprinted card. It's a 0 mana artifact, so you get to play it for free, and the equip cost is 1. So it only ever costs 1 to put on a creature, and it gives that creature +1/+0, and that's it. So it's actually a free, kind of like Veteran Sidearm, which cost, I believe, 2 and 1 to equip, but wasn't a very good card. Is Bonesaw a good card, though? Would you pay 1 just to make a creature more powerful when it enters the battlefield, or whenever you needed it to? If you have the extra mana, that's a good place to put it. But Bonesaw does some more interesting things in the set. When we look at the white cards, we're going to see cards that care about equipment, and Bonesaw is almost a perfect equipment to do that, just because of how efficient it is. We're also going to see the Surge mechanic when we look at red and blue cards. Cards with Surge cost less to cast if you've already cast a spell that turn, which Bonesaw does perfectly. Bonesaw doesn't affect the mana that you're playing to cast it, so it lets you enable Surge whenever you need it, without having to worry about how much mana you have. I think Surge decks are going to be a thing. Red-Blue is going to be a draft archetype, and Bonesaw is going to be part of that archetype, one of the cards that you want when you play it. Now, without any outside usefulness, say you don't really want equipment and you don't really want to activate Surge, perhaps you're not in red and blue at all, I don't think you need Bonesaw. I think the effect 1 mana to pump +1/+0 is a little overrated. I was having a discussion with people about this yesterday, and I don't think it's that great. It does cost a card from your hand. You will be down a card when you play Bonesaw, and I'm not sure that the extra 1 damage or the extra 1 power on a blocker is worth a whole card. I certainly wouldn't play an instant that gave +1/+0, and that's it. Of course, this is a little different. It's a more reusable effect, and if you're in a deck with a bunch of flyers, this could definitely push in the extra damage. Same with unblockable creatures like Benthic Infiltrator, or some of the ones we're going to see later in this set. So Bonesaw is definitely a card that doesn't seem like it does a lot, but has a lot to talk about in the context of this set. And I'm happy to see it here, because I think it's going to be very interesting during draft. Walker of the Wastes. This costs 4 and a colorless. Remember, that symbol means you have to pay at least 1 colorless to cast this card. It has trample for a 4/4, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control named Wastes. So you have to really pay off, because a 5 mana 4/4 with trample is not that exciting. You're going to be a little bit behind if that's the first thing you put on board, even though it's not bad at all. Really, it's really not. Like Kozilek's Channeler, if you never intended to use the 2 extra mana, it was still a 5 mana 4/4, which could block, which could trade, and which could eat a removal spell if you needed it to. This guy has the potential to get much bigger, but you do have to take those wastes. Thankfully, the wastes are probably going to be in the deck anyway, because you need them to pay this cost. So a lot of times this will be at least a 5/5 trample, which is worth 5. With the upside of becoming much bigger if you drafted a lot more wastes. Remains to be seen how many wastes a person can actually pick up in draft before they go overboard, and whether or not all of those will make the cut in the deck. I think it's going to be difficult to make a full-on colorless deck in draft, but I'm not saying it's impossible, and I guess I look forward to drafting the type of deck that has mostly wastes and payoff cards for colorless. Walker of the Waste seems like an okay card to me. Not something I'm excited about, but something I'm definitely looking at. Alright, Eldrazi Charm costs 1 and a colorless and has 3 effects. I'm sorry, did I say Eldrazi Charm? I meant Warping Whale. Choose one. Exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. So if we see something that's like a 4/1 or a 3/1, this gets rid of that the same way it would a 1/3 or a 1/4, which is not bad. There are plenty of creatures this hits, plenty of creatures this doesn't hit. Also worth noting that the exile clause is still relevant for that pack of Battle for Zendikar. Even though there aren't any processors in Oath of the Gatewatch, we still have that one pack of battle that cares about cards being exiled. There are a lot of exile effects in this set, and Warping Whale is going to be useful to that end. You can also use it just to pick off a Scion if you need to, but that doesn't seem like the most versatile use of this ability. I feel like the first ability was used, or was added to this card as a Jace, anti-Jace combat trick for standard or even older formats, as surely this card is going to be played in modern sideboards a little bit. But second ability, counter target sorcery spell. There is in one spell in particular that comes to mind in this new set. A black, we'll see it later, I forget the name of it right now, but it's a 4 mana black sorcery exile target creature. This seems like the perfect card I want against a deck that has a bunch of those, since that card is at common. Warping Whale is at uncommon, though, as it should be. Versatile charm type effects like this are almost always at uncommon. The less exciting ability here is to put a Scion into play, but if you need that extra ramp, or if you just need that surprise 1/1 blocker, or that extra attacker on your next turn, this can be used to fulfill that, and it's not a bad option. I'm looking more at the first 2 abilities, which are going to be good, and a lot of times this might just stay in your sideboard, as it could be a dead card against decks that don't really have... Actually, it's never a dead card, because the last ability does always let you get something out of it, but the first 2 abilities might be irrelevant against certain opponents. I think it's versatile enough that you want 1 or 2 of these, that in a draft, if you see them, they can be quite useful. But I think the most relevant abilities are going to be the first 2. Alright, Spatial Contortion. Basically a colorless removal spell. 1 and a colorless for an instant that gives target creature +3, -3 until end of turn. And I forgot to put it here, but I was going to make the comparison, the obvious comparison, to Nameless Inversion, which we just saw in Modern Masters 2. Nameless Inversion had the same effect, except had an additional spirit-related ability tacked onto it. +3, -3 for 2 mana. Now, granted, one of those has to be colorless here, so if you're only playing a couple of colorless sources, you may find this in your hand unable to use. Also, there are a lot of creatures in this set that have 4 toughness or more, so this is not a straight-out removal spell for every creature. It is an early game removal spell. Now, this also has the nice upside of being a pump spell in certain situations, just being a giant growth of some sort. For example, if you have a Benthic Infiltrator, you can cast this on it to make your Infiltrator a 4/1 for the turn. It will survive, and it's getting in 4 unblockable damage. So Spatial Contortion is versatile enough that I believe it deserves to be an uncommon. It kills enough that it's definitely going to get played and snatched up when people see it. And I'm willing to bet it's going to be one of the best and most highly picked uncommons in this set. Don't quote me on that. That's just a guess right now. What do you think about Spatial Contortion? Do you think it's going to see play outside of Limited? I think it definitely has the potential to in the right kind of deck if they can support colorless mana. correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe this is called Chitinous Cloak. It's 3 mana equipment and 3 to equip. So before we even read that effect, which is pretty decent, it costs 6 before you can even put it on a creature, and then costs 3 for each additional creature that you put it on. But the equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Menace. Now, is that worth 6 mana? Would you pay 6 mana for an aura that says +3/+3 or +2/+2 and Menace? I certainly would not. This is more of a reusable type effect since you can equip it to another creature, but I think this is probably just a tad bit too expensive. It reminds me of things like Brawler's Plate, which costs 7 overall before you can equip it, and gives you some sort of evasive combat ability. Menace, I think, is going to be a little bit better than Trample, as it means that the creature, if it is blocked, is probably going to eat up 2 creatures or something to that effect. This is also decent in decks with unblockable creatures and flyers, as equipment always is, but I think it's just a little bit too expensive to be that excited. If it was a common, then that would make more sense to me, as uncommon is a little odd. I don't think I really want this in the Equipment Matters decks either. We will see a card later that is very interesting with equipment. Look out for it in the red review. But right now, I don't have very high hopes for Chitinous Cloak. This is the type of card that every now and then I lose to, and I'm kind of disappointed because I don't think it's that great. But let's see how it plays out, and then we'll get back to you on that opinion there. Strider Harness, we have another equipment. 3 mana, this time 1 to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and haste. This one seems a little bit better to me than Chitinous Cloak. Being able to give any creature you play haste means that you're able to bash right away with anything. It punishes your opponent for swinging out because you could just play a fatty, pay 1 extra for it, and then give it a boost on top of the ability to attack right away. Is this worth 3 mana to put on the battlefield? That I don't know. The type of decks that really want hasty creatures tend to be quicker decks, but if you have a slow, mid-rangey kind of late-game deck where your creatures are all big but you can't get them out right away, this could be fine just as something to set up those creatures so they can start attacking right away and have an immediate effect on the game. Strider Harness definitely gets a better grade in my book than Chitinous Cloak, but I can imagine myself cutting this a lot or just passing it up in general. I don't think I'm always going to want it. I'm not sure what decks want it more, but it definitely feels like the slower late game decks want it more than early game decks. Alright, next we get 2 pieces of rare equipment. Probably not the most exciting thing to pull and draft as your rare, but something worth looking at. Captain's Claws. This one costs 2 to play and 1 to equip, so it's fairly cheap. Same stats as Bonesaw. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, so once it's on the battlefield, it's giving us the same as Bonesaw, which is a 0 mana equipment, which means that we really want this ability to do something if we want it to look better than Bonesaw, which I said you don't always want anyway, is a little bit overrated. Whenever equipped creature attacks, put a 1/1 white core ally creature token onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Alright, so is that worth the extra mana? I definitely think it is. Especially on an unattested board, this is going to get carried away very quickly. So not only does it make allies, which matters in this set, and triggers rally every time the creature attacks, if you have those rally creatures, but if your opponent's not just eating up those 1/1s, this adds serious power to the board. It's essentially the turn you equip it, you're adding 2 extra power since you're going to get 1 off the ally and 1 off of the equipped creature. I really want some sort of synergy for this to matter, whether that's ally synergy or token synergy in general. Just making a mass pile of creatures, but I think this is playable. I see myself passing it just because my experience with the equipment is that it's not usually worth the cost, even when the effect looks decent, save for obvious ones like GT or Batterskull, but in draft, equipment usually is unexciting for me. This might be a little bit different, but I need to see what kind of decks can actually support it. A lot of times that 1/1's going to come out, and he's just going to get eaten up. But in a pile, if you have a pile of removal and you can keep opponents' blockers off the battlefield, go for it. See what you can do with this and steal the game. Too many hits off this, unattested, and your opponent's not going to be able to make it back. They're going to have to eat up the allies you've already played while you're making more. It does put a huge lightning rod target on the creature that's equipped, though, so expect that creature to eat the first piece of removal your opponent sees. But that means that you can put Captain's Claws on a weaker creature and make it relevant for that exact reason. The other piece of rare equipment here is Stoneforge Masterwork. This is 1 to play, 2 to equip, so decent Surge Enabler here anyway, off the 1 mana to cast. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it. Okay, so total of 3 mana to get going here, and 2 to re-equip. But this is basically a creature type matters equipment, which shouldn't be too difficult to make really good in this format. Think of all the allies. Think of all of the Eldrazi. Think if you swarm the field with Eldrazi Scion. Something like Broodmaster that puts 4 Eldrazi on the battlefield. This gives +4/+4 to any Eldrazi that's equipped. That's not counting Eldrazi that are already on the battlefield. Even little synergies like Merfolk, you might have a lot of those in the deck. As long as it shares a creature type, then you're getting a significant boost. You do have to kind of go wide to make this worth it. If you look through your deck and you're done drafting and you have 2 allies, you have 2 elves, you have 2 Eldrazi, which I think decks are more likely to have more Eldrazi or allies than other things, then maybe this is worth it. But this can be cut. Don't go all in on it. Don't make a bad ally deck just because you have this deck, just because you pulled this card early in the draft. Make it work if it works. If not, cut it from your deck. You can tell when you don't need this card. If you have a creature type that only has maybe 2 or 3 creatures, and that's your biggest call for Stoneforge Masterwork, cut this card and don't play it. Deceiver Forms. This is one of the most exciting cards to me. 6 mana and colorless mana, so 7 total for an 8/8. Alright, so we're already getting a huge fatty for 7 mana. I think that's pretty good. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you reveal the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature, you can have your other creatures become copies of that card until the end of turn. Deceiver Forms will still be Deceiver Form, though. You may also put that card on the bottom of your library. So you're getting kind of a weird scry here. If you don't like the card on top, you can always throw it on the bottom. Also, this is a May ability, so you don't have to have all your creatures become a copy of something worse than they are. But imagine flipping something like just a big 5/5. Suddenly all your 1/1 tokens and everything else you built up on board are 5/5s for that turn. Be careful if you flip up a legendary creature, that if you make all your creatures become that guy, it will wipe all of them except for 1. You'll be left with Deceiver Form and 1 creature. So not only does this kind of like let you see what creatures you're adding to the board next turn, but you can really go off if you hit the right type of card. Scry type abilities are great with this. If you can set up a creature on top that's just fantastic for Deceiver Form to flip, then you could really just end the game. There are times where maybe you can play this and you can end the game the turn you play it if you're lucky on the flip. I think this card's awesome, and I'm looking forward to drafting it. I haven't looked through and seen what type of creatures are really broken with this sort of effect to make mass copies of that creature, but I'm looking forward to seeing what we can flip up. Endbringer, the release day promo, if you will. This is 1 mana less than the last guy we saw, so this is 6 total, one of which has to be colorless for a 5/5, so it's fine. 6 mana 5/5 is okay. It untaps during each player's untap step. That's already great. If it didn't have any other abilities, that would be fine. Kind of like a pseudo-vigilance type ability. And then we just get a slew of activated abilities. Either tap Endbringer to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Tap a colorless and Endbringer to make target creature unable to attack or block. Or tap 2 colorless and Endbringer to draw a card. Tons of utility here. You basically get 2 effects out of this. You're either Bastion with a 5/5 or ping into damage, or bashing with a 5/5 drawn card, or stopping a creature from blocking and ping into damage, since this untaps during your opponent's untap step. Notice that ability plays around things like Rush of Ice that would tap Endbringer and stop it from untapping. The ability untaps it regardless. Endbringer just does a lot, and I feel like this is a bomb in Limited. It just does so much: card draw, ping off 1/1s or X1s, stop attackers, stop blockers, plus it attacks itself quite well and becomes a sizable blocker. It might as well have Vigilance, but no, that's not true. That's not true at all. That would be broken. But Endbringer just seems great. I'm happy to pick this up first almost all the time, as long as I can support that colorless mana, which, as I've said, doesn't seem that hard to pull off. Thought Not Seer. 4 mana total, one of which has to be colorless. When Thought Not Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You can exile a non-land card from it. When he leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. So notice that the card that they're drawing is not the same card that you exiled. The exiled card is permanently gone. They draw a new card when this thing dies. Most of the time, this is going to be a downgrade to that opponent's card. You're going to take the best card that you see, and they're going to draw a random card when this dies. That, in my opinion, is worth playing. Also, this is a 4-mana 4/4, which is just fine. You can only target an opponent with this, so you can't use it the same way you can with things like Transgress the Mind, where you can target yourself and exile one of your own cards. The only reason I say that is because there's a blue enchantment that might care about you doing that in Standard, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Also, just something cute to point out, in Two-Headed Giant, the opponent that you exile a card from is not necessarily the same opponent who draws a card. When this thing dies, you target an opponent to draw a card. So if one opponent seems like they have a more controlling deck and one has a more creature-based deck, and you feel like you can handle one opponent better than the other, you can choose the opponent who draws a card when this thing dies. So this is kind of like a Vendilion Click type effect, where you get to rob your opponent of their best card, or maybe their the piece that they've been holding on to, or the removal that they can't cast yet, and you get rid of that. But eventually they are going to redraw a card to replace it. It's probably going to be a downgrade to what they originally had. Matter Reshaper. This card looks like he's yelling, "Come at me, bro." 3 mana 3/2. That's fine. That would be fine on the colorless, or on the vanilla scale anyway. One of which has to be colorless here. When Matter Shaper dies, reveal the top card of your library. You may put that card onto the battlefield if it's a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. Any permanent that includes lands, so it's really hard to brick on this unless your deck is full of 4 mana plus cards. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. Well, that's just great. So you're either drawing a card or you're getting an immediate card onto the battlefield. Even if that's just a land, that makes this kind of like a Solemn Simulacrum type card where you're getting value off of it dying. Not quite the same as Solemn Simulacrum, as that has ETB effect and a die trigger, but this is just great. The ability to get free cards on death is awesome, and the stats are just fine that it's going to trade favorably with creatures of the same cost. So you're happy to kind of throw this in the way of something, especially with scry effects. Again, this is great, as you can set up what's going to be on top when it dies, potentially pulling yourself ahead on card advantage. Reality Smasher is a 5 mana 5/5 with trample and haste. Even if this didn't have an ability, that would be awesome. It is a rare though, so you're not going to have to play against it all the time, fortunately, because this thing is a beast. Whenever Reality Smasher becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, counter that spell unless the controller discards a card. So automatic 2-for-1. Your opponent, if they want to take this down outside of combat, they have to use a removal spell, and they have to discard a card in addition to that removal spell. This can still be targeted with abilities that destroy it or remove it from the battlefield, but there aren't too many of those in the set. So your opponent's going to have to ditch 2 cards to get rid of this thing, and it does hit hard. It has haste, so it's hit and run away, and it has trample, so it's not getting chunked. Control decks will hate this, as they're going to have to use 2 cards to take it down, and that is big game against a control deck, which is trying to get ahead on card advantage and leaving you behind. Reality Smasher, I'm picking it every single time I see it. And the final rare here is Eldrazi Mimic. And this is an intriguing little card. It's a 2-mana 2/1, so it's kind of like a Phyrexian Revoker type card. It could fit in any deck, and it has the stats to justify itself on the curve just fine. Let's read what it does. Whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may change Eldrazi Mimic's base power and toughness to that creature's power and toughness till end of turn. So if you play this on turn 2 and you start following up with 3-drop Eldrazi, 4-drop colorless creatures, 5-drop colorless creatures, Eldrazi Mimic scales in power. Remember, it's already justified as a 2-mana 2/1, which is okay. That's cuttable in some situations, but it's okay. It's never going to be absolutely terrible. But if you start playing things like Matter Reshaper, this suddenly becomes a 3-power creature for 2 or a 4-power creature for 2. You don't have to pay any extra mana to make this scale along with the other creatures you're playing. Eldrazi Mimic goes in a deck that has a very nice curve of colorless creatures. I wouldn't jam it in just any deck. I would cut it from a deck that's predominantly white and doesn't have a lot of ways to pump it up unless you really need a 2-mana card. But this thing has potential to be quite powerful for just 2 mana. He's going to push in a lot of damage in aggressive decks, and I think is really interesting card to look and see what kind of things we already have. Sorry about that. What kind of things we already have. I know Phyrexian Dreadnought has resurfaced, as it does every single set with some card. But think about playing Phyrexian Dreadnought alongside this guy. It's just insane. But Eldrazi Mimic, interesting card. We'll have to get back to you on whether or not it's actually good, but my opinion is it's going to be quite powerful. And we get to our colorless mythic. Yeah, we knew it was coming. Kozilek, the Great Distortion. One of the first cards we saw from this set from the leaks. Originally thought by a lot of people to be a fake, but turns out it's real, and here it is. 10 mana, so we're costing the same as Ulamog here. Are we getting the same kind of value as Ulamog? This one needs 2 colorless mana, unlike Ulamog, which was just flat out 10, but this does quite a bit. First off, it's a 12-12 instead of a 10-10. Not that a 12-12 is that much better than a 10-10, to be honest, but this one has Menace as well, so your opponent's just hosed if they can't block it over and over again. Otherwise, Kozilek just kind of eats up the board. When you cast Kozilek, notice that says cast, not when he enters the battlefield, but when you cast Kozilek, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So you're automatically getting some sort of advantage off of Kozilek. Excuse me. So as soon as you cast Kozilek, you have 7 cards in hand. If Kozilek is the last card in your hand when you cast it, boom, you just drew 7. 10 mana, draw 7 for a 12-12 menace? Absolutely. Then we have another activated ability. Discard a card with converted mana cost X. Counter target spell with converted mana cost X. Wow. If 7 new cards in your hand, or up to 7 new cards, you should have a pretty decent suite of cards to counter whatever your opponent plays. Kozilek does not have Indestructible like Ulamog. I have played against Ulamog a couple times, and the Indestructible was very, very relevant, especially with cards like Bone Splinters flying around. So Kozilek is a little bit unprotected in that regard. It can be destroyed, but the counter ability is supposed to protect it here, and it should do a fairly good job of that if you have a nice mix of cards in your deck. I imagine most of the time you cast Kozilek, you're going to draw, or you're going to end up with about 4 cards in your hand, some of which are going to have different converted mana costs, so you should have a fairly diverse suite of counter spells in your hand. But yes, Kozilek, drafting it every time. There's also a hidden piece of text at the bottom. You might not be able to see it, but it says, if you draft Kozilek, the Great Distortion, you must play it in your draft deck. Ulamog had the same text, so it makes sense that it's here on Kozilek. But I've never been lucky enough to play with Ulamog. It's the type of card I would love to pull and just draft around, but hopefully I'll get to see Kozilek once or twice. The card just looks insane, and I think this is going to make a huge difference in Modern, and I'm sure we'll be seeing it in Standard for a while too. But yeah, let me know what you think of Kozilek. Is it better than Ulamog? My opinion is that it's probably a little bit better than Ulamog, although Ulamog has built in kind of a 2-turn clock at the least because of its ability. Kozilek just seems incredible as well. So yeah, what do you think? Is Kozilek better? Is Ulamog better? Are they about the same? Is one of them a home run and the other one's just way lagging behind? Let me know what you think. And let me know what you think about the rest of these colorless cards. What do you think about Eldrazi Mimic? What kind of cards do we have that are going to make it busted? What about Deceiver of Form? What kind of card do I need to flip up to make that insane? Can I flip up a Kozilek off of it? Yeah. Get a 12/12 Menace for the turn. But that's not quite what we want to do now, is it? Let me know about Bonesaw. Is Bonesaw justified outside of decks that have synergy with it? I don't know yet, but this is why I do these videos, to see what people's opinions are. So you've heard my opinions. Let me know what yours are, and hopefully I will hear from you soon. Stay tuned. We're going to look at the colored cards next, and we'll wrap up the end with the multicolored cards.